Welcome. Welcome to New Art Exchange and welcome to the launch of Bhairav and Pani. It's a pleasure to see you all here, supporting the exhibitions. And those of you who were here yesterday, I'm going to use Tasawar Bashir's influence of thought here, that I think we entered what he refers to, referring to Arabi, the great Sufi philosopher, the interspace, a place more real than our world. And that's interesting, that a creative moment could take us into that space and take us into a new reality, a sublime melancholy and illustrious joy, as the artists, I would say, were bending space and time, inverting concepts of reality, creating unseen dialogue in the streets, shops and parks of Hysam Green. I certainly entered new spaces following Madhavi Gore. There was intoxicating fumes of life that we experienced yesterday in the global quarter of Hysam Green. And it did provoke new questions and dialogues. And it entered a spiritual dimension. It lifted our spirit. It took us on a journey. And it reincarnated my understanding, our understanding, I think, of ourselves within the macro sphere of this infinite moment of time and space, and the irony of zero. So today's session, we have a very brilliant panel, and I'd like to introduce them to you. I'm going to start with Munir Kabani, who's been an absolute joy to work with. Munir, welcome to Nottingham. And Munir has been instrumental in this process. He's been connecting with us on a regular basis and has worked hard to keep us all together. And something I will share with him. He's not a fan of chickpeas. That's something we learned yesterday. I think he upset the chef. The chef started ordering his own food. This is illegal at NAE to bring external food in. So the chef wants a word with you. He's based in Goa. And he has a background in cinematography, film theory, and also interactive sculpture and installation. And at the heart of his work, he explores human nature and spirituality, and is keen to explore the pulling forces on cultural forces, actually, within the global context. He has a very long-standing relationship with Nikhil Chopra, who I will now introduce. So Nikhil Chopra is the chameleon of self-portraiture. He changes and shifts. I have a funny story to share. He sent an image on WhatsApp. It was this very handsome-looking fellow with a moustache, and I just thought it was Nikhil sharing a chap in the line who looked like him. It didn't look like him to me, so I assumed it wasn't him. So I waited at the airport patiently, and there he arrived, the same chap, but with the glint and smile that is always there. And it was Nikhil Chopra. It was a most amazing moment. I asked him, "Is that really you?" And he turned to me and he says, "Is that really you?" So really confusing who I thought I was and thought you were. He's based in Goa and Bombay. He's been in and out of both cities, and originally has a playful connection with Jammu and Kashmir as well. He likes oysters, I remember last time. And he makes a great father. I met his children, and they are an inspiration to listen to, hear their ideas. He's practices live art and performance, trained in fine art and elements of theatre as well. His durational performances are epic. They last for hours, they last for days, and yesterday he did a 12-hour piece with us, and we were honoured to have him in the space. And recently, his work was presented at Documenta 14, which is one of the big cinquentennial programs of art and culture presented in Athens and Kassel. Each performance that Nikhil puts on is riddled with this substantial suffering of some sort, and has a heightened narrative and a range of subplots that unfold. And those that you were here yesterday, I know some of you stayed the full course, and thank you for doing that, would have seen that transition. Audience number 1, I remember you referring to them as. They're here today. So Madhavi Gaur is also based in Goa, is a live art performer and the mother of 2 adorable children, and is the wife of Nikhil Chopra. They make a lovely couple. And you can see the kind of conversation and dialogue that is created between the two, the yin and yang relationship. I have to say something really extraordinary happened yesterday, and this was my observation, that she has the ability through her presence to make what seems unreal suddenly plausible, offering new possibility and understanding, and also subverting the ideas and distorting key concepts like what is the male gaze. Her presence and beauty, I would say, allures an imagination we just cannot simply describe within our value systems. And Madhavi certainly captivated and confused the neighborhood yesterday. I think you had a big fan of boys, auntie-gees, uncles, and grandfathers and grandmothers. I think you really inspired the neighborhood.
The shopkeeper also actually said she's a mannequin with a new mannequin, mechanical one. I mean, Faraha, she said, ye nayi mannequin hai.
Ah, kya baat. That was really an interesting person. We'll come on to that conversation further, absolutely. Ustad Bahudin Duggar shatters the concept of what is a legendary artist through a very sublime presence. And his dialogue goes back 14th century India. And it connects with that moment faster than the speed of light, because it is thought and it is within the gene. He's part of the Duggar family, and this is the tradition of Indian classical musicians, dating 20 generations. This is unbelievable. If one generation is 30, 40 years, then we'll do the maths. Well, it is the 14th century. And the ancestral memory that sits within the metaphysical and physical blood of Bahudinji is a transcending norm of what is specialist knowledge in the 21st century. And this is an extraordinary legend and grandmaster of the Rudravina. And certainly last night, if you were all here, or some of you were here, that explored for the first time ever in Nottingham, in particular, a midnight rag, it was a moment of being speechless. To my right, Tasawar Bashir, the man with the lovely smile, I would say. And his name actually means imagination. And in reality, I think he surpasses the definition of imagination. He's the inventor of the Sufi aesthetic, the science fiction of Sufi sound and visuals. And you must read the In Conversation with our director of programs, Melanie Kidd. It's a brilliant insight into what is his work. You must read that. And we can find out more a little bit in just a moment. I think he said to me many a time that he believes that the end of time has already happened and we're simply catching up, and that the future has therefore already happened. And if that's the case, we can bring the future back to where we are today, and I think that sits in his work and the technology of his art. He too then bends that space and time continuum with new interpretations of the great art form Kabani and its application and presence in wider society to create that moment of perfect harmonia and harmonic utopia. So that is an incredible ambition, and I think you sense that in his work when you see it. So do see Pani downstairs in the other room. Suri Pillai, she's also on the panel. Welcome, Suri. A trained physical theatre specialist from Jacques Lecoq in Paris, a writer and poet, and also artistic director of Yard Theatre Group, and Annie's talent and specialist projects producer. Long titles, Suri. her award-winning installation Get Up Stand Up has helped inform a vision for the newly launched National Justice Museum, and her warmth and dedication in art and culture in Nottingham and the region is always ready for social change and activism, and has played a key role in the Here, There and Everywhere partnership, which I'll talk about in just a moment. She loves a glass of wine. And she'll take any colour, which I love. So really intercultural on the wine. So that's... well, it's good to be open, Suri. It really is.
Do I need to make an announcement now?
No, you probably do. Introductions then, we've done. So I think that tonight is about a reflection and a moment to realise the moment of what's happened downstairs. Just to say that this whole project is part of a bigger programme called Here, There and Everywhere, and it's a connection with UK and South Asia. And there's many people I need to thank, including the funders. Arts Council England, the Reimagine India funds with British Council, our local Nottingham City Council, and Esme Fairbairn, who support the core of our funding. There's no doubt the creative team here, led by Mel, and has to be mentioned alongside Jeff, who's dealing with the technicals, Suri, Beth and LJ, Anita on front of house, Aaron the chef, Devinder, the new chap, and all the volunteers and all the teams and all the boards that support the organisation as the organisation grows and intensifies in this new kind of complex organism it's becoming. And I have to definitely thank all our partners, Delphina, primary quad format, Midland Arts Centre, in India, Chatterjee and Lal and Jaga in particular. Most of all, one cannot continue anything in this work and world without the thanks of the artists. So Munir, Kabani, Nikhil, Chopra, Madhavi Gaur, Bahudinji, Sajan Mani, who's unfortunately not here, Tasawar, Bashir, always. So the big thanks. There's always a big list. So let's start with where we're at. And we've just experienced. Did we all experience the film downstairs? Okay, great. So let's start with the film, because the film is really interesting, and Munir, maybe you can help give us some insights. You've co-directed this with Nikhil Chopra in a very collaborative way.
Yeah.
And it would be good to understand some of the provocations in this beautiful film that undulates with all sorts of emotions, with this really intense contemplation. So what does it evoke? What does it provoke? What is the central themes of this beautiful film, Bhairav?
Well, at least for me in particular, and I'm sure for Nikhil also, in different degrees and variables, but timelessness, the timelessness of to create this feeling of time unlimited, time undefined,
right.
And through time, through this, to collapse it a little bit and to expand it again. Mm-hmm. And we've made an attempt at least at that, and try to evoke this feeling of timelessness, and through that it's like an inquiry into the self a little bit. So the slowness helps you try and get back into a space where you can actually contemplate the self a little bit and explore it, and create this space within you where you can feel a little bit more the timelessness of this existence.
But I think, yes,
Yeah.
I think there's something definitely about the moment we're in today, which is pressure of time.
Yeah.
And as much as the world has shrunk and you can enter new spaces so quickly, there is a panic around time and our time.
Yes.
I remember, Nikhil, you were saying earlier around sort of the idea of beginnings within the film and what that actually sort of leads towards and alludes to. Maybe expand on that, because Bhairav itself is...
Well, just to throw a little bit of light on our partnership, in a way we come together with very different practices, very different histories and genealogies in our ways of working and thinking. And what Munir has, I don't have, and what I have, Munir doesn't have. And that's, in a way, we are kind of opposites. You know, he has hair I don't on my head.
Do you like chickpeas?
I love chickpeas.
There you go.
This is not our first project together. We've been working together at least for the past decade, and we've made a few films together. And we're really interested in this notion of where thought begins, where expression begins. And in a sense, there is an attempt to try and understand where we are today. So this idea of wanting to go back to the beginning is a sense of us also critiquing where we are today. And this sense of paranoia about time and speed and high-speed internet and faster connections and things. You know, we're kind of obsessed with that. So the idea of our projects is to pause, in fact, stop, press rewind, and start to think about where we all come from. The project actually started with Munir and Bahauddin's friendship, and where he invited Bahauddin Saab to come to our house and play the Rudraveena early in the morning, and it was like a blessing actually for us, and that was the beginning of this project, but also an interesting beginning for that day as well, because he played at dawn. And that led us into thinking about many other beginnings, which is why we see our lead character, Sarjan, as well. One of our other lead characters, Sarjan, very early man-like, if you think about it, doing something very rudimentary, like banging nails into wood and fastening a piece of canvas onto it and then dragging it with rope. I mean, in a way, if we think about those elements, wood, metal, rope, and canvas, I mean, these are things that ships are made out of, and we've conquered, I mean, the West has conquered the world based on these very simple elements. So then we get into colonialism and thinking about how that has shaped us. And then, of course, there's the end where we see Madhavi's character reenacting a birth scene. And if I can share this, I mean, I had a recording of the sound of her giving birth to our daughter, and that sort of became the soundtrack that sort of fed into this imagination of what is perhaps the first sound we hear, is the probably muffled sound of our mothers giving birth to us. Inside our mothers, perhaps, you know, that. So this idea of beginnings, you know, with Bhairav being a dawn rag, has really kind of informed the rest of the film. And
it's interesting that the film completes the cycle with birth.
Yeah.
And the shrieking sounds of pain, Madhavi, I mean, that's quite piercing. And so tell us about that moment within that film, the end of the film, which symbolizes a different beginning. And perhaps you as, I guess, the solo female in the project.
Yes. In fact, I hadn't heard those sounds almost until today. I mean, I just sort of refrained from hearing them.
Right.
But I'd been through these sound breathing sessions, and so I had like 3 sessions before the birth, and it was a home birth in this house, on that bed, and I had and that was really a transformative moment, because really a lot of members of my family weren't exactly in favor of having a home birth, but it was a really but I did it. This was the one thing I knew that I was set on, that I was going to do it this way, and I did it that way. And it was really very empowering and transformative experience, not just for us, but also just for my womanhood in a way. And not every woman has to experience this as an empowering experience, but for me it was. And it's different. And Nikhil had, in fact, I don't think it was so planned, but he had recorded these sounds, and then well, perhaps, but it was their iPhone sounds, It's sort of.
So there are actual sounds of giving birth.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting because sound is a very provocative, kind of layered sort of moment of creating thought and imaginations. And when you were in that moment, there were sounds where you felt that they were joyful, like it was an enjoyable moment, to the shrieking pain.
Yeah, it's called orgasmic birth.
Yes, it seemed like this. And also
it's a Russian, it is a thing. It is orgasmic labor. There is this thing that women describe their labor as being orgasmic, and I mean there are many layers to it, but perhaps.
I had feelings and emotions thinking about this. I mean, not so much the orgasmic birth, although the thought did cross my mind as to what the sound was. And then there was a horror and terror in the shrieking. And as the camera went away, it looked so tranquil and peaceful. And yet on earth there was shrieking and terror with the women of the world. Perhaps.
It's really interesting when Munir asked me to maybe would you do this? Would you do a naked scene and would scene in the nude and would you be comfortable with this? And then Nikhil said we'll use these sounds, and I hadn't heard the sounds, and I'm very comfortable, because we're really close, and so somehow I had a feeling of. I said, okay, well, maybe after this I can do anything. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do the scene. And I did it, and I hadn't heard the sounds, like I said, but a friend of mine gave birth with the same midwife a month before me, and she is a singer, and she sang something that sounded like opera, and I don't sing at all. So, but so for me, I think it was really interesting when these sounds had this very primal sort of effect. And actually, I don't think I heard my own sounds during this time. I've really only heard them after. I've only heard them, in fact, fully only now. So and yeah, like Shivani was saying, there were like wailing sounds but really.
Well,
like whales, sounds of
earlier
whales.
We were talking
not
about
wailing, but whales. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Madhavi.
Yeah.
Earlier we were talking about the kind of ancestral element of India. And Baldin, when I picked you up at the airport on our epic journey, which I won't go into now, let's just say it was epic in every way. In fact, the whole project has been epic. And there's an offline conversation we can have in the bar later. But Baldinji, you and I had the most incredible conversation for our 2.5, 3 hour journey from London Heathrow Terminal 3. We had a pre-conversation as you queued with 500 people and only 2 people to attend you, and then the journey in the car. And in that journey in the car, we talked about classical Indian music, its relevance today, and its relevance in the film. And you, as a practitioner of quite a, what is assumed to be or perceived to be a conservative tradition, and a privileged tradition perhaps even, have a different take on the role this beautiful music can play in wider society. So perhaps share, maybe grab the mic, your thoughts on your role in the film and the role of the classics in the contemporary moment.
Well, frankly, I didn't know about my role in the film. All Munir asked me was to come and play the Bhairav, and I played the Bhairav 4 years ago. So this project has been going on, and just before we came over here, once we met at the club, and he showed me this is a part of the film, and this is I'm editing this. How can I cut it over here? Can I cut the music over here? I said, yeah, you can do it. That's it. This is the first time I'm seeing the film, and I think it was wonderfully stitched together. I think it is a classical concept of Indian time and timelessness, because Bhairav is basically it stands for space. When you say in India there are 5 basic rags, and Bhairav is the first rag, it stands for the celestial sky. So the idea of the spread, which was relevant in the entire film. Also, timelessness, because the last shot of the childbirth sounds, also it creates a kind of a loop in the entire film. I feel you can again go back to the first shot and keep on going. I mean, that's what I think. And then I think another strong point was the perspective, because if you see before 14th century, if you look at the miniatures in India, the perspective was in the eye of the person who was watching it. The perspective was never it was never in the picture. It never went, and like Michelangelo's paintings, and with perspective is in the painting. So the Indian aspect of spreading out, stretching out, arise from this kind of a perspective. And I think where Munir has done those long shots, and the entire thing looks like a miniature. At the same time, when he's shooting me playing, where there's a double perspective, because it's at a point it's meeting where I am. At the same time, it is because of the music is rebounding from here. It's creating it's going out, so that this vastness is being created. I was really happy to see that, and there's so much Indianness in this film. I cannot begin to even talk about it. It's like it's a very classical film, I would say. It comes from Indianness, I would say the entire subcontinent, from right up to Asia. So the thing of the spread, where there is where you spend time doing things, you stretch time, you look into things, you spend. It is indulgence with leisure. It is indulgence with all those infinite smallest things that you spend time doing and looking at. So it was quite nice for me to see the way he has used the music, and I had never seen any of his work earlier. Right. I just said yes to him because I really think he's a nice man. No, frankly, I'm not joking. I just saw him. The first time I met him was at Shivani's ashram, and the only thing I remember was her face, and I remember the name Munir. So because when he asked me, I just couldn't say no. So I had, just because of the kind of man he is, I would say yes. And
I think I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the whole idea of the sort of nature of the LARP, the crescendo within the music that's played, and how it comes in and out, and is at the core of the film in a sense, does show you the kind of journey of mankind in India, or humankind in India, in some ways. But what's more interesting is the kind of aesthetical representation of a film that draws on very ancestral cultural traditions, which then define the art or the contemporary expression of this film in a way that's very Indian in a sense.
Yeah, also his like in the first shot, if you see in the Bhairav, he was telling me all the subtle changes in the background with the color, with the sunrise happening. They are so subtle, like we would have to watch the movie 3-4 times, which is normal in such kind of movies. You watch them again and again until they grow up on you, and then you realize what's happening. So which means you can go back to it again. I mean, it's not like that makes again time circular. It's not like from here to here, so you keep on going back to it again. And it's like when you read the Shastras in India, you can begin in the center, go to the front, or begin in the center, go to the back, and then come back, and then so I think that Indianness of or that Asian thing of having a very circular time was very strongly portrayed in this.
Let me bring Tasawar Bashir in on this conversation. Shifting away from Bhairav just for a moment, but actually connecting with, and we'll get Suri's thoughts on the connection between the Bhairav and the Dampani in just a minute. From your point of view, I mean, this whole thing about time is really interesting. And you talk about the future of time, Taz, in your kind of desire to present and create new imaginations. And you've created this Sufi aesthetic. Tell us a little bit more what this actually really means.
So in Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, time is linear. But if you look at medieval Sufi texts, they describe a very vivid cosmology, a Sufi cosmology of the afterlife. And within Qawwali, often the narrative arc is about a person, a protagonist who's alienated. He's lost, he's disoriented, he's alone, and he is looking for the beloved. More often than not, the beloved is God, or it could be a saint, or it could be the Prophet Muhammad. And what the texts describe is a movement towards interspace. Interspace has different names, like Barzakh, and it's a kind of no place between this realm and the next realm, the divine realm. And so people like Rumi say to us very clearly that if you move towards the beloved moves towards you as well. So not only do we have linear time, you have time looping back within the linear trajectory. And this really opened up a way of thinking about Qawwali that I was really inspired by, and just started testing out different ideas and just kind of playing around with kind of Qawwali sounds and all the different compositional elements that are included in it.
I'm going to bring this in, and don't mind if I do.
Please do.
You shared a great story with me the other day about explaining the Sufi aesthetic with the great maestro composer.
I can't remember what I said.
I'll remind you. You were with A.R. Rahman. You've heard of augmented reality, that's AR, but actually the real AR is A.R. Rahman, which is great.
Right, I know the story.
There is that story, no, but the actual story was about how they were moved they were emotionally moved by the new representation of Qawwali. And Qawwali in time is a very modern concept in terms of, tell us about the modern concept of Qawwali and why they were moved in this moment.
Qawwali in a way is always modern because it's always trying to speak to its audience, whoever that happens to be. So when Qawwali first emerged, arguably in the 14th century, the dervishes, whoever these guys were, they looked around them, they saw spiritually impoverished individuals, and they thought, okay, how can we go about speaking to these people in a language that they can relate to? So the Sufis absorbed all the beautiful things around them, all the texts, all the bhajans, all the harmonies, etc. And they've continued to do that. It's very clear if you listen to Qawwali in the 1950s, it's very different to the Qawwali in 1970s, 80s, etc. So I think Qawwali is always evolving. What was the next bit?
I think it was really about the evolvement
right.
and how it moved AR.
So we were having a production meeting about doing a Sufi concert for 10,000 people. So it's like, how do you make Sufi spiritual and relevant and appropriate in that kind of context. So we were just kind of brainstorming, and I started talking about some of the research that I'm doing around Qawwali, and from interviews with artists and producers, and this idea of dum, which is embedded in the work downstairs. And dum goes all the way back to folkloric and biblical information about the creation of the first man, the creation of humanity, where in the Bible, in the Hebrew text, and in the Quran, it's the same story. Man was animated from clay. No, man was made from clay and then animated by God's breath. And the breath is called dam, and the man was called, or humanity is referred to as Adam. And Sufi singers are always singing about dam mast kalandar. So I was explaining to the guys that this is where dam comes from. And Nazif, who's the promoter for AR, he's been his promoter for, I think, more than 10 years. He was really moved by this explanation and said, we've been doing it for years, but now we know why we're doing it. Right. So that was kind of quite nice.
That's the moment in time, I guess. And let me bring Suri in on this. So Suri, with the positioning of Pani alongside Bhairav, why did that moment happen? Big question, I know.
Well, so we were on this R&D in India, research and development trip to sort of discover, look for connections with artists and with the land itself. And we met so many people. Obviously, this project is, the project that frames all of this is called Here, There and Everywhere, which is about Britain and India. And of course, going around, people were rather confused as to why, like, neither Pakistan or Bangladesh was allowed to be involved in the project. It wasn't part of it. But what we were seeing and what we were feeling was the sense of a region, of a people, and of a history which goes beyond borders. Now, it was mentioned earlier, I'm a bit of an activist. And it's not that I'm an activist, it's that, when something is disallowed, I do have a certain questioning of that. So it's kind of curious looking and going to Goa and meeting the crew in Goa and seeing this fantastic film, which at the time was in black and white. Yeah. The iteration was in black and white. And it was it looked really old, and it reminded me of when I was at university and watching a Satyajit Ray film, which inspired me. And it inspired me because it did slow down time, because it did talk about truths to me that were deeper than the current situation, let's say. It was about people, it was about children, it was about landscape. And it kind of reminded me when I was watching your film, it was just thinking, it just kept coming into my head. And then knowing Taz and speaking more about his practice, of course, then there was this great big divide between India and Pakistan, and later known as Bangladesh. And again, the Sufi, what we talked about, Qawwali is a tradition, the Persian influence, and then Bhairav itself.
The Hindustani classical.
Exactly, the Hindustani, yeah. So, for me, it was never about India. It was always about this region and this people and the cultural expression and the poetry, really, that I could see coming from the work. I find the film extremely poetic. With the music, the drawing, all these iterations of man and womankind's experience and expression of being human. So, which is where Madhavi's presence for me is extremely important, because, as you say, the cry of a woman, and having been there and done that as well, it is not, I wouldn't describe it necessarily as pain. It is a euphoric moment where I believe there to be a connection which is greater than we are as ourselves, as individuals and every day. And I think that does connect with your question in that, it's taking you very much beyond borders. It's taking you back to the root. And for me, that moment really cuts through the film, because it takes us, we're all exploring and journeying, and for me, both of the iterations, so Pani and Bhairav, both do cut through that and suggest an alternative.
Okay, let me ask about performance now, because performance is at the heart of this weekend, and for the first time we've, in a launch weekend, combined performance in such an in-depth way. And Suri, you're from a performance art background, and you were very keen to develop this. Yeah. And it would be good to just hear from Nikhil and Madhavi about their the moments. And so Nikhil, let's start with you, because you kicked it all off at 1:30 in the afternoon with a very dramatic rebirth in the very stylish, colonial-esque clothing of some sort. And you went through a really interesting transition. And I was intrigued by it, by the character you were, but I wasn't quite sure who the character was. Maybe just expand on the journey of that character over the 12 hours that unfold, or at least the 10 hours before the stroke of the midnight hour.
Well, one of the things I'm really interested in is breaking stereotypes, creating images, and then, in a sense, destroying them to make way for new images to emerge. So in choosing a persona, I think about them more as personas than I do as characters, because they are more extensions of me than they are something out there that I base myself on. So, I grew up in a house where my father was a banker, an executive, wore a business suit to work every day, and a necktie, and polished shoes, and, clipped nails, and iron shirt. So, in a sense, for me, it was important to ribbon this character. So, create this urbanized, educated, gentleman, but man, I would rather say, with a mustache. I've sort of done that specifically for this project, to create that image of what one would think of as a kind of educated Indian man, if you want to call it that. And then the idea was to shed him as well, to break him into pieces and fragment him through the duration of the performance, which is why I cut the costume up and become, in a way, a bum on the street, which is, in a way, the reality of our urban spaces, in a way, because, you see the Mercedes as much as you see the man on the street, in the same breath. So I wanted to embody both of them in Nottingham especially.
What's also interesting in our visits to India is that we feel that in terms of time and cycles of time and the birth of new moments and reincarnations, etc., that in one moment of a gaze, you can see 100 years of time happening in the same moment.
Yeah.
And
hundreds of kilometers of cultures as well. You see that as well. No, you just don't see time, but you also see spaces in between people as well. Like the Kabani Tower, which is like this multi-story building for one man and his family. And then you see the guy, who's negotiating his little thatched hutment on the street and for the survival of his family, his extended family, his brother's children, blah, blah, blah. So you see those distances as well, you know.
And talking of distances, the epic drawings that you create, and in this case you create two juxtapositions, one which seems like a spiritual landscape of some sort, and certainly comes alive through the cutting of the arch, which is extraordinary as the film is played and you cut the arch in the film.
Yeah.
And then you've got this very kind of urbanized sort of cityscape,
Yeah.
which hints towards spaces and places familiar to the citizens of
this place.
Nottingham.
Yeah.
What's happening there?
Well, firstly, the idea was to create this nocturnal space. As we were going to invite Bahauddin to play a midnight rag, I thought it would be interesting to set that stage for him as well. As you know, a rag is in a way a kind of embellishment of time, if you want to think about it that way. I thought it would be interesting to create this drawing as an embellishment of that space that he would occupy. But, you know, going back to our collaboration, the collaboration between Munir and I is, I immediately went into his archive and said, Munir, pull out a landscape for me that reflects that, you know, that reflects that sublime drone, you know, that these strings create, you know, these deep basses that these strings create. And, you know, and then we found this image of, he sent me a bunch of them, and I was immediately attracted to these Himalayas. The high Himalayas is what you see is in the drawing, reflected in the water. In a way, that itself is a loop, right? You see the image, and then you see its reflection, and then, you know. And
the reflection comes alive with the distance as the arch opens. That's what I saw today.
Yeah, I think also Suri's done an amazing job with lighting it. Like, it's as the drawing has gotten completed, I think it's been relit, and I think that's fantastic the way it's been done. But also to you know, just as much as I'm juxtaposing this ripped up character against this well-suited character, I think it was also important for me to juxtapose, let's say, urban, highly developed city, a city like Nottingham, against that really pristine, absolutely silent landscape. And that Ferris wheel in the center is a Ferris wheel that is familiar to Nottingham because this gets set up during Christmas, and you know, right. But also and the Goose Fair, and also alludes to the cyclical nature of time that we're all really interested in. So, you know, that hopefully the Ferris wheel in a way links the city to the landscape.
Interesting. And you've used a representation of a wheel that's often seen in the villages in India, probably.
Yes. So, you know, that's another image of Munir's which became a reference to use an image from the village.
Is there a sort of a hint toward, because the whole idea of the drawing is about connecting with the film. The film is about Goa and the kind of urbanization that's going on in locations like Goa.
Yes.
What's the commentary there?
So I think we're all really, all of us, really, including Shivani, and we're all really acutely aware of how India, or at least Goa, as a rural village, paddy field, coconut, banana republic, is being systematically or unsystematically actually being urbanized, and we can see it change before our eyes. Right. So the collision of urban spaces and paddy fields is very visceral. It's very palpable. You can feel it, and it troubles us. So I think this is something that our film also is interested in, because when you end the film, you see the road, you see the cars, you see, you know, you're no more in this pristine, quiet landscape. We start to reveal, blue plastic sheets from the monsoon that people used to cover their shanty houses with. So you see all that, and that gets a little revealed as well. So we are really affected by the transformation of India by neoliberal politics, and, you know, new markets coming in and new products and plastic bags everywhere, and chips packets and empty Pepsi bottles.
Right.
So that's really our reality.
Okay, thank you, Nikhil. That's really insightful about the drawing and the performance. Madhavi, there's no escape. You're next. I have to say, there was a real urgency in your representation yesterday. And whenever we meet, there is a kind of silent storm, I feel, about to erupt. And when you were in Ice and Green, you didn't say that. When you're in the Ice and Green shop and you start as a mannequin, there's a real stillness, but it's a calm before the storm, because it ends up in a very, I would say, quite a seductive sort of a moment where you represent your body, the female beauty, but transformed through. Was you wearing a mask of some sort? Like a, no, I must have imagined that.
I was wearing a mask.
Yes, here. It was.
I was.
We were all very intrigued by that journey, and what it was representing, and also the reactions of the community, which I will share with you after we hear from you about what happened yesterday from your perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I think it's really interesting, this conversation you've been talking about time, of course. Munir has been talking about time, but it's also, I think, so much about breath, this grappling of time that we all feel, and I'm constantly feeling it. Because there's so much life around also, grappling with being a professional and feeling inadequate because you have so many different lives and roles that you play out, and there's never enough time to do everything. And so the thing is that we really don't pause and breathe, I think. And the thing is, if we were more conscious of our breath as yoga and so on, which I don't even do enough of because there's no time to do it, if one did it, then you would actually, everything would just disappear because you'd just remember to breathe more, and that's actually the most important thing that we just need to do in a way, which is also controversial. So, I think what I started making live work really recently, since we sort of established our own art space, and I did stuff for camera and so on. But it's and Nikhil has been doing live work ever since I've known him, and then it just so happened that I sort of started saying, okay, well, now I have it's just so many come on, let's just jump in here because we have a space of our own. And that moment where you suddenly realize that, okay, well, you have completely, everything's out the door, and you have yourself, this position, and this time and space, and you can be completely encapsulated, and nobody can touch you because no one wants to, break that illusion. Or, you can be completely suspended in that time and space. So you're completely in charge. And it really actually becomes a moment where you can breathe, whether you're performing for 5 hours or 6 hours, it's so low, you're completely in control of, pretty much in control of the dynamics in that space. So it's, so the storm before the expression. Yeah, and of course there's this anxiety, and I'd forgotten everything that I was going to do. There's no time to rehearse or to think about this because I haven't had it. But when you're in that moment, it actually, you're just playing with time and space and body, and
it's interesting, the starting point is very still, and then you wander and enter the local area. And you take us on a journey as we follow you into spaces that we have not explored yet. So the skateboarding park, with the local global mural.
that was actually really nice. I mean, the shop window, actually I'll let Munir talk about that more, because it actually came from a reference that he put in front of me when I had done a window piece before, and then he said, well, this reminded me a lot of this, maybe you want to think about that. And then he gave me a short story to read, an Urdu short story, and we were sort of trying to figure out how to play with that, or he was urging me to, or encouraging me to sort of work with this, and it worked really well because I'd been exploring this idea of framing the figure, framing myself, and in windows and of architecture, but also of screens and in different ways. And then Munir sort of added also those layers to it and more. So I'm gonna. I would love him to talk about it. And yeah, the story is beautiful. And would you like to talk?
Take your time.
No, I mean, it's just I mean, it's not just, but it's a beautiful short story.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, they don't place it exactly, but since it's an Urdu short story, I superimpose my place onto it. So I thought it was either Lucknow or Karachi or Lahore or somewhere North India or Pakistan. And
Indeed.
it's about this girl or young woman who wants to explore the city and explore the street a little bit more without being observed, without being maybe it doesn't say it so clearly, but without again, it's my interpretation probably, but without being leered at or stared at, which is the normal situation in North India, or I'm sure even in Pakistan. You know, I don't know too much about, but or Bangladesh for that matter. So it's her journey and how she goes into a shop window and she sneaks into the shop window actually, and she pretends to be a mannequin for an extended, for a short, not a super short, but not a super extended period of time. But she goes there and she does that, and she wants to see if somebody notices her, and she just takes the role of the mannequin, and she observes the street. She's looking at all sorts of people, and mothers and children and families and men passing by, and nobody's looking at her other than this one young boy who keeps looking at her, who stares at her, and he catches her gaze, and he's confused, and he doesn't know whether he's like, so he like probably looks away, and then he looks back at her, and then he's like, I don't know, maybe there's something going on here. But it's just a reference to this one guy who looks at her.
And whilst you were up there, because I noticed that you, as much as you were still, you were watching and observing what was happening. Was there a moment that the gaze that was connected with the community?
Yes, for sure. I mean, it's this So in the story as well, she sort of she suddenly realizes that she has the world at she can just stand there, and she has the world at her she can look at everything, and there's no one. The gaze is so problematic, especially when you're in the gaze upon the self, the gaze upon the other, in different cultural situations, so this window actually is a really interesting interface where if you're standing behind the window, you can actually look out there and you can look at anything you want, and nobody can really, unless they smash the window, they can't do anything to you. So I mean, it's really so you can actually so in the story as well, she suddenly realizes she has the world upon her feet and she can look at anything, and then this one guy catches her attention. In my story, there was a lot of action because it was an announced event, and there was it wasn't as candlestein as it could be. I mean, and I haven't tried it in that way, but there were a lot of people in their cars stopping at the traffic light, and they would suddenly notice me actually, and there would be and I think they didn't just notice me. I think there was eye contact for that whole few minutes or seconds or however long that those traffic signals was a lot of that going on, and they weren't looking at the traffic light, they were looking into my eyes. I had this feeling constantly. So I think what I felt was that I think with performance on the street also this can happen where there's a moment where and I know Nikhil speaks about this a lot as well. There's a moment where you feel like, okay, you've just given someone a little bit of something to take home with them, to go home and say, you know what I saw? Like on the bench, then I walked out and there was a man on the bench walking his baby in the pram, and he looked really, actually, I don't know, having not such a great day, or just kind of
he didn't look too
sort
happy.
of going through his routine with the baby or so on. but after that moment, I mean, and I sat next to him, and and then there was a little moment where he cracked a smile, and I could see it because I had that mirror in my hand, and yeah, so those kinds of things.
Just on the mirror thing, because is that a way of creating an indirect gaze with the wider world, or is it about self and how one prepares oneself in a sort of beautified way as a woman to then engage with the male species or the wider species?
No, it's sort of it's a little, I mean, it's an interest in self-portraiture. It's an interest in being able to freely look at yourself without having to. It's about I mean, it's not about vanity. It's about not having. I mean, I think women of my generation, women who were either in their late teens, early 20s, and the early 90s, living in India and sort of growing up at that time, just are really are always in this cusp of like rebellion. I think self-expression comes with a lot of rebellion, internal rebellion, like this kind of like this constant existential angst around how repressed they were and how they've been, And I think it's a generational thing. I think 10 years later, it's been different for women. I think it really has. So I don't know. There's this always, you shouldn't be too vain, or you shouldn't look at yourself too much, or looking. I mean, and the world was different. So you don't look outside. Yeah. So the mirror is again another interface, like the window, and it's also you can look at the world, but you can also look at yourself.
And just finishing off on the performance now.
Yeah.
You end up in New Art Exchange. The night falls.
Mm-hmm.
The street comes alive with different characters now, from the daytime shoppers, or the drivers, or the mothers and fathers doing their chores, and the darkness arrives, as does this new seductive character. What's happening with that moment where you undress in public? Albeit there's a moment where you move away from the window, and it becomes a kind of a voyeuristic experience for those looking in on this side now, without the technology.
Yeah.
What's going on there? Because there's the black umbilical cord, there's the sewing technique, very seductively positioned between your legs.
Well, I think like when you're just sort of with it's helpful to have obviously there's no script, right? So there's just a loose map and like objects to play with, or like sort of like tasks to fulfill during the time that you've given yourself, and body performance and life, this because it's so unscripted.
Yeah.
So the like actions and creation of something like a drawing or a garment or something like that is. And then also playing with the mise-en-scene, which I really enjoy actually, which is why I like working, or I've been, working for a while. I, maybe it'll stop, but like just working with the frame of a screen. So, and I did this before, but I think Munir suggested we use the window of the NAE because he had done a site visit before, and then.
Good
I mean,
call,
the windows are, fantastic. And also, it wasn't, so it was like, I think very, very slick. And then you could see
It's interesting contrast from the taking control in a kind of observation of the outside looking in as a mannequin, and then shifting to a performative, seductive moment with the street. Now, I have to share this funny story. I was with a lovely chap called Suresh. He'll probably want to ask some questions, actually. It's usually... Oh, there he is. Okay. Well, just in a moment, Adrian. But Suresh and me crossed the road and we watched, and a group of young lads walked past us, about 10 of them. And one of them noted you in his periphery vision. At first, I was thinking, I hope they don't see you, because they're going to make fun, or they're going to start whistling. But then I thought, well, no, let them be who they are. And let Madhavi control the moment. That was quite interesting. And you did. you didn't know they were there, but what happens is that the one boy stops everybody, and they all stop at fast speed, like brakes, emergency brakes. They all come back. They get their phones out. They talk and chuckle, and they make fun. They go, nah, 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 did you see me? All of this is going on. And it's seen in a very kind of sexualized way.
May I say something?
Yes, please.
I think that's really interesting because we had a lot of discussions about what could be on view to the public without us getting into huge amounts of trouble. And actually we broke down what Madhavi actually did, and none of it is sexual at all.
Right.
None of it is actually sexual.
It's just my seedy interpretation.
No. No. It's, and what we were discussing, and this was a really important key moment, I think. We were discussing very much about, this kind of view of a female body. So if you wouldn't mind just demonstrating, Nikhil, the pose that she did. So how many men sit like that? But if a woman does it, then so I think it was very much about the things that are permissible was what we were talking about, I think, quite a lot. So in a way, it's kind of like people's responses was the idea, I suppose, I think, is for people to go, why am I looking at this as well? Why would I peep through the sort of window of a door to look at somebody? What is this creating within me? So it was kind of playing, I think, well, this is what we were talking about, wasn't it? Playing with that notion. And actually, when we broke it down, pretty much all of it could have gone in the window because none of it was suggestive in itself. It was the fact that it was Madhavi doing it and that she's a woman, I think, that was kind of part of the, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to open the questions because there are a couple of people who wanted to have some questions. Can we have the roaming mic? Is this the roaming mic? Oh, you have a roaming mic. So this is Beth and everybody. She deals with our public program. Any ideas? Talk to her. Adrian, you wanted to ask a question. Wait for the mic because it's all being recorded.
Yeah, sorry for jumping down a bit there. You used that cue word question. You should have said that. First of all, I want to say how very much integrated both things are on so many different levels. And I think from both an art and scientific point of view, and a mathematical point of view, it's almost one piece. Let's deal with small observations. Kids slow down, you don't, they having kids slow you down, and there's a kind of, the spaces in between are where the resistances are, a couple of observations there. Women spread their legs to give birth, men spread their legs to show their power. Just the body language of males in Western society. I was struck by the universality of the whole thing as well, and it transcends the religious barriers, obviously. It transcends cultural barriers as well. One thinks of the relationship between Persia and Greece and some of the ideas that came through, and I've written down some things that maybe I can talk with you guys later individually about, things like the Mobius strip. I don't know if any of you guys know what that is, you do. And also the influences that, because I'm a great A.C. Clarke fan, 2001 Space Odyssey, influences, or is it the other way around? Maybe. The music, also in 2001, is as vital as the music in this film. The landscape draws itself on the cloth, effectively, from the primal materials. So many things, I don't know where to begin even, but I mean, I just want to, just some questions there, not even questions, observations that will elicit further questions from other people, I'm sure.
I mean, thank you, Adrian. There's some really interesting
I'd say that's really well read,
observed.
and we're hoping that the audience can unpack some of this, because we go into it, with a lot of intention, with a lot of thought, with days and days and days of discussion with lots of whiskey and, long nights into the AMs. So, and we're bashing away at one idea, and we're going at it, trying to peel through as many layers as we can, or kind of build them as many layers, not to shroud it in mystery and to take it more into abstraction, but to create that complexity that we all are, and the way we think. So I think your reads are really quite bang on.
Thank you, Nikhil. Well, look, we are running out of time, and we have run out of time. So I just wanted to end on this moment.
Maybe there's one more question.
Was there one more question? Okay. Is there one more question? There is one more question. Then we'll definitely have the one more question. Sorry, Nikhil. I didn't see that.
As much an observation as a question, but I thought a thread running through it to me was about being an artist in time, that the slow dragging of the canvas and hammering the nails and so on, it brought to mind the whole maturing process of ideas as an artist. And then I was interested that the musician was seen close to, but then when you saw the artist drawing, suddenly you were seeing the musician from further away, and then you saw the artist very detached while the woman was anything but detached. And it seemed like the detachment that you sometimes have to have as an artist. Now that was my experience, but does that strike any chords with any of you?
Yes, I think the politics here are not just being an artist, but I think it's about being a male artist, and there's a difference I feel there, because the world is kind of dominated, unfortunately, by male artists, and I often feel that I think women are slightly underrepresented in this large art world, even in 2017. So it's not just the artist, but it's the gaze of the male artist, and the implication of the female's body in that. So I've gone through an art education as well, where the model that posed for our new drawing classes was often a woman, and you think about art history in that way as well, that the male gaze has been something that's dominated culture. So hopefully this film kind of draws a little bit of attention to that, and the insensitivity. For example, in a drawing class that I would conduct, I would ask, before bringing the model on, I would ask which student in class is first willing to take their clothes off and pose for us. So I think the female's body has, I think, been subjected to quite a bit, and I think the film wants to draw some attention to that.
I think that's brilliant. Okay, we will end now. And just to say a big thank you to the panel, and a great insight through the films, through the installation and the performances, for us as an organization, as audiences, as artist communities, to experience the collapsing and reinvention of time. And I always say that we just need to make time, slow time, embrace time, but not control time. So thank you everybody. And if you haven't seen Pani yet, please do go see it. There's many events happening in the public program. I think there's a curator's tour by Suri on one of the days, 29th, is it? Yeah. 29th of July. Yep. And there will be a talk by Tasawar Bashir, which will look specifically at his practice on the 22nd of July. August even. There's a lot more happening. There's a big South Asia season happening from July, August, September, October in this city through this organization. It is the moment where we are reflecting on 70 years of independence as well. So that is also happening. Do look at the program, do look at our websites, and do participate, and do contribute towards our donations as well. Why not? Thank you.